Hello, everybody. It is Tara Boothby, and this is Conversations for Restoration. I am super excited to have Rana with me. And Rana is an emotionally focused therapist, supervisor, trainer. He's well known in our lovely attachment focused community. And he's also just a really cool guy to talk to about not only being with people with trauma, but we want to talk a little bit about like some of the ways that maybe we get hurt by our religious experience and stuff like that. So Ryan, thank you for being here.
Yeah, good to be with you. Happy to jump in here on these hard conversations and hopefully open up a space that's meaningful to somebody.
I agree. And I mean, trauma is always a hard conversation. It's an important conversation, something that we like to hold lightly. So sometimes in the attachment focused world, we'll talk about like applying pressure to a person. Like some people we hold tighter, some people we hold lighter. I guess for you, Ryan, when you lean into a conversation just about trauma, how do you hold space to discuss trauma in general?
Hmm, that's a pretty broad question.
You said I could ask you anything.
You can. How do I hold space for it? You mean like in therapy or in general?
I, yeah, I mean, wherever you lean into, like, yeah, in therapy or just between you and I, in a
Yeah.
safe conversation, how do we talk about trauma?
Well, first of all, I have a tremendous amount of respect for it, for the person for sure, but for trauma, right? I think the fundamental instinct of any mammal, like hardwired DNA, is to survive and to connect, which to our bodies is actually the same thing because to connect is to survive. And trauma is a direct affront to those very basic things. So it affects every level of someone's life. And so I think there's such bravery when someone is willing to talk about undergoing an experience like that, that's such a threat to their very core of their existence. And so to me, it's an incredible, you know, statement, or it's so honoring that someone would be willing to talk about something like that. That's the first thing is I'm just appreciative that someone's willing to share that. And I'll go on a quick aside, and I can't quote this accurately, Tara. If I was more prepared, I would have. But in recent years, I believe it's the APA, so American Psychological Association. No, this is an international crowd. They altered the definition of trauma to include, undergoing something that would threaten someone's life or something like that. And then they added with the inability to escape.
Ah,
And I think
yes.
that is really a key addition. I know in my life, I've undergone some trauma, and one in particular involved an inability to escape. And once again, I think the brain receives the danger of that, and then it becomes sticky, right? So what's in the past doesn't stay back there, right? The brain brings it forward, constantly warning us, trying to keep us alive. So anyway, I'm talking and talking, but that's kind of how I think about
It's
trauma.
amazing though. I love that. And the sticky is a great word because when we talk about trauma, when we talk about fight, flight, freeze, fawn is something with spiritual abuse, institutional trauma. There is a lot of fawn that goes on. But that stickiness, my lid is flipped and the trauma kind of keeps it stuck up a bit. And also that inability to escape is so important. And then also within the diagnostic manual, looking at sort of PTSD and conversations about trauma, we'll say real or imagined threats to my survival. And so we hold, like Ryan and I, we're in the landscape of working with people with their central nervous systems, with their need for co-regulation and self-regulation. Um, Relational trauma, like we're not just here to survive through our biology, but through our connection, like you said, connection, our nurture. And relational trauma is a heartbreaking, tricky thing, a tricky, sticky trauma.
Yes, I agree. I didn't know you were going to pause there.
Yeah, it's um so again, part of honoring trauma, so honoring the traumatized person and then honoring trauma, I don't know, like as so sometimes, I mean, and even I have this in my book, but when people come in and talk to me about trauma or their difficulty, so I could be traumatized by my anxiety, by my depression, I can be traumatized by an event, by a broken relationship. And sometimes I just like take a moment to like pull that piece off so that we can see it as a thing alongside of us and get to know this part that is sticky and getting us pulled away from our I guess our internal working model.
Yeah. Yeah.
um so when you lean in, we notice the trauma, we hold sacred space for the trauma. Again, how do you lean in to discuss or to talk to somebody holding that sacred space?
Yeah. I think it depends on where I am with them. I think
Mm.
if I don't have a pretty strong relationship, if I'm not a person who's of trust, then I tread pretty lightly, and I always want to give the person control anyway, because if I'm too active of a receiver, that can be re-traumatizing. But also if I don't want to know, right? If I'm in a self-protected state, like this is my dissertation I wrote. My dissertation is on PTSD and sexual trauma. And so, there's a book from the 90s called The Courage to Heal, and written by two women who had horrific sexual abuse. And they talked about going to, I believe it was pastors, priests, and multiple therapists. And as they tried to disclose their story, the person sort of behaved like I can't handle the intensity of this. And they described that as a re-rape, right? And
Re-rape,
so,
yeah.
yeah, so this is serious business here. So I want to make sure that I am someone who has done enough of my own work that I can live congruently and I can hear hard stories and I can contain, not absorb, but I can be with that person. And yet I also want to be mindful that I'm not too assertive, because you've got to have the relational equity and the trust to enter that far into the story. So I want to give that person a lot of control, but I also want to make it really clear, hey, I want to know what you want me to know. Like I can handle this, I can do this with you, right? And I really believe, and I think about Catherine Ream's research,
Mhm.
that I can loan some of my limbic energy to aid them in holding their load. So it's sacred.
Yeah, it is sacred. And I mean, Ryan, this is just so important, making things explicit that we honor the sacredness of what is the trauma. We honor the sacredness of the person who has endured trauma. And I'll say to people, it's like, do what you can, when you can, as you can. But also as a person who's coming alongside to love another person, it's like I do what I can, when I can, as I can. We're keeping in pace. We're sensitive to the boundary that has been invaded. And also that most traumatized people have had authority breach that boundary. And that's a huge part of institutional trauma is unsafe leadership.
Yeah. Well, I have a lot to say about that.
Excellent. I
But
want to hear it.
well, I want to tread really lightly, because the last thing I would want to do, because my passion around this is to try to help make a pathway out
Yeah.
of this place, right? Because the impact of being traumatized, especially in those ways, is so profound, right?
Yeah.
Because the very person who was supposed to protect and lead and guide in such extra sacred spaces of faith, you know, has now had the opposite effect. And yet I get passionate because I want to clear a pathway where someone doesn't get stuck there. And in doing so, I got to be careful how I say this, but because I don't love the phrase institutional trauma. and religious trauma.
Hmm.
Even though I absolutely know horrible things happen. I've been the recipient of some leaders who did some things they shouldn't have done. But I really prefer to say it that way. You see?
The
Because
repeat how that I have been the recipient.
yeah, I've been the recipient. I think about two in particular. I've been on the recipient end of two powerful leaders who did things to me or around me they should not have done.
Yeah.
And so, but that's very different than thinking about institutional trauma. And here's why. If I conceptualize it as here's these two leaders who did things they shouldn't have done, there's a pathway through that. If I think about
Mm.
this trauma, institutional trauma, now you just described probably 2.5 billion people, right? Or I hear this a lot in my office. I've been hurt a lot by the church.
Mm.
And I start to go, on one hand, I'm like, I'm so sorry. Like, this should have never happened. I just want to sit with the pain of that, and I do. But it also, my body kind of cringes because I'm like, that's a dangerous way to say that. I know what you mean, and I'm not at all denying the impact of that, but it doesn't blaze a trail to not get stuck there. Because, like, I just happened to Google this before I came on, right? Like,
Good.
within the Christian faith, how many of us are there? Well, there's 2.64 billion people. So if you want to
Hmm.
get technical, if you're hurt by the church, you're hurt by 2.64 billion people. So if you think about how many do I actually know, it's 0.0000001%, right? And so then if you start thinking about who actually hurt me, it goes into like 55 zeros, 1%. And I say all that to say, the way I think about how I've been traumatized starts to speak to potential journeys towards being somewhere else in life. So I think it pays us, maybe not a great word, pays us. It's very impactful how we think about who has traumatized us. Because
I love what you're saying. Just so that you know, because it's so experiential attachment focused, like how you and I are conditioned in our brain, making it explicit. And you're saying, hello, please humanize the face of the person who has caused you harm.
yes,
Because when I sit with somebody who's been harmed by their parent, there's a vivid image, and we can, especially with emotionally focused individual therapy, we personify and we move towards interaction and experience to help this person heal in a way when amends may not be possible or safe.
yes,
But humanizing the face of whatever the institution is that harms us helps us to, like you said, find the path forward. um and we can look at, like there's other people who are trying to find a way to do nonviolent protest, but if we just categorize there's this collection of people doing harm, we are not humanizing our experience, and that is sticky.
exactly. And people are going to get hurt. A lot of
Oh,
people.
I love it, Ryan. This
Yeah.
is so good. This is what we do. This is what you and I believe in, is making things explicit for healing.
Yeah. So I want to stay with that for a moment, if that's okay.
Of
Uh,
course.
grabbing your word there. I like your word. Actually, I was going to use it. I'll use both words, but I like yours better. The categorization, right? So maybe I grow up with a abusive or something stepfather, right? And then maybe I marry a man who treats me poorly and go through a hard divorce, and marry another man who treats me poorly and go through a hard divorce. And it's like, well, what's happened there? Well, three or so men have been really awful to me. But if we're not careful, this is sometimes the benefit of therapy. This gets categorized or projected, and it's like
Mm,
men are unsafe, right? And so,
yes.
so now what? Here's the problem: is now what? Okay, well, now half the world, roughly, is unsafe. So now I'm unsafe. So the world's unsafe. So now I live in this rigid, protected state over three. becomes 300 billion or whatever that is. And so that's very dangerous. And so, but backing up, it's also natural because that
Mhm.
categorization, that projection is just my brain trying to protect me. It's my body.
Definitely.
It's my body without me even trying, saying, hey, this reminds me of something. These three men almost took your life, either physically or even just emotionally. So let me sort of weaponize or bring up resources to make sure this doesn't happen again. And that's
Yes.
completely natural, and that is therapeutic. That's my body saying, hey, Ryan, I need you to go have a series of meetings to organize this to some degree, to re-experience, to grieve this, to sit with the little boy or little girl, whatever it may have been, with the mean stepdad, and sort of do your work to a piece where I can enter a room and take every situation for what it is, as opposed to having over categorized or projected states, which continue to now sabotage my life. So it's really important to get this
It's
clear.
it's so important. And then we know, like, oh, Brian, I just think this is so on point with evolutionary psychology and attachment theory, that when there is threat, we can just get stuck in our nature response and get very automatic and get very survival focused. But then the longing for connection, like we're hardwired for connection, it's also vital to our survival. So that's that confusing piece. And then there is a way through that connection. Finding one safe other, we try really hard to be that safe other, the symbol of attachment, and to be relational with somebody who's facing whatever level of trauma, big T trauma or little T trauma. But what was going on for me when you're speaking is, of course, threats to connection are trauma, because we see attachment in terms of life and death, and that is because attachment is a part of our survival. A baby does not survive without a caregiver. And then we go forward and we have all of these symbols of care, of authority, of mentoring. And when those people do damage to us, that registers as life or death,
Yes. Yes.
and the feeling inside when somebody you love and admire as a leader shames, blames, humiliates you, and it can feel like a death in the inner cosmos.
Yes.
A black hole just erupted inside of me.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And it's such a tricky balance that we're talking about here, because I have to go to those dark places
Mm.
and be with and grieve and organize and sort of let if you think about like a physical wound. I was just telling you before we came on, I've had two major surgeries in the past 7 months. And so I don't know how many weeks of recovery I had, but like 14. And it's long. And you're like, come on, we want it to go faster, but it doesn't go faster. It goes at the pace it needs to go.
Yes.
And this is hard. And so many of us, in our effort to sort of not stay down, we want to rush out of those places.
Yeah.
And if we rush out of those places, we're more likely to find it again, unfortunately, especially because our brains are still trying to do the therapeutic work. And when we don't allow that, our brains project it externally, and which is
Yes.
extremely disorienting. And so trying to find a way to make space for the healing, but to also do it in a way that's well discerned, so our brains don't project it out. Because once it projects it out, you see it everywhere.
Yes.
And then the results of that, Tara, are actually what's most deadly. Because once I start if I don't do the clarifying, healing grief work, then my brain projects it forward. And now so much of the world is dangerous resulting in me isolating even more.
Definitely, definitely. And I mean, that was a lot of my spiritual experience, and I romanticize it and I share this freely, that is like the wilderness experience. That's like this metaphor of Christian spirituality. But what rocked me was when I realized that I had been in the wasteland, spiritual wasteland for years, because we enter when we and I didn't honor what was hurting me as trauma, blinded blocks to myself. So for me, my fight, flight, freeze, fawn, my fawn wasn't working anymore. My freeze wasn't working. I'm not really great at fighting because then I'm pissed off at myself. So eventually, when we run out of options, it's natural in a trauma response to flee. And what pains me is my people who are fleeing into nothing.
Yeah.
And that's not just a spiritual experience. That is the risk of like sexual trauma, physical trauma, oppression, othered. Anytime we're othered. And it's so sad because nothing is the opposite of what you and I believe in love science. So like Sue, our great trailblazer and our originator of emotionally focused work. Sue just like lended us, all of us, her limbic system, her hope for love.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love your language right there, because when you talk about fleeing, and you
Mm-hmm.
talk about not recognizing this as trauma, what I sense and feel there is this goes very, very fast for people, which makes sense, right?
Yeah, I think the ending, especially, and we see this in when marriages dissolve. It's kind of, I'm marinating in the problem. I'm marinating in the problem. And then again, stages of change, pre-contemplation, contemplation, action happens quickly, often. So the person in the room with us says, I'm done. And then our job is to believe in a marriage relationship. I have to believe her. She says she's done. Let's evaluate how done she is. And then I have to help you, brother, to believe that she's done. And that's part of that's true for any exiting. When we exit, we have to believe we're exiting, but it's hard to unpack why.
Yeah, why and what? Because like I was saying, when people don't recognize the trauma, when people don't do the work that your body's calling for,
Mm-hmm.
and it makes sense. When I'm hurting, I mean, literally last night I had a big backache and I'm like, give me some relief. I don't want to go to physical therapy for months, right? No, and it makes sense. But what happens is we speed up right at the time we need to slow down. And what we're often fleeing from is ourself. So I'm actually
Mm-hmm.
moving away from my own pain. So now I divide myself.
Yes.
And a divided self tends to project danger. And so once again, I become more unsafe. The world becomes more unsafe. I isolate myself even more, and we start the whole thing over. And so you see people who experience trauma, and then 30 years later, they continue to experience the trauma, not realizing that they're stuck in it. And
Yeah.
I want to be careful not to blame the victim here. And yet, unfortunately, once I'm traumatized, this is now my chore. This is now my thing within me first, and then
Mm-hmm.
within relationships. So that fleeing concept is something that we want to be really, really cautious around. I was trained, you know, 30 years ago now. That was called an emotional cutoff, meaning
Yeah.
my body has this big chore that it's asking me to do, and it sucks. And it's
Mm.
not fair that I have to do work on the receiving end of some powerful person that wronged me, and now this becomes, my 2 years of work. And you're like, that's not fair. It's not just. I'm like, I totally agree. I wish I could change the rules of the universe. And yet, if I move away from that too quickly, I've done an emotional cutoff. And the research on emotional cutoff, again, is that it's now seen everywhere. The world becomes more and more unsafe. I divide myself, and now I'm repeating my own trauma. And by the way, that's probably the exact path taken by the people that traumatized you.
Definitely. And then the self-loathing and our unmet attachment yearnings and the meaning that we make from that and that fucked upness inside. That
Yeah.
then I'm like, gross. Like I'll say part of my experience when I look at institutional trauma, but when I humanize it. So the people that were serving me Kool-Aid, I then shared the Kool-Aid. You know,
Mhm.
I wasn't just drinking what I saw was not good juice. I also then was serving it to others. And that's that pain. And that's not just in a religious experience, that is trauma. So then the traumatized person goes off and they're cutting everybody off and they kind of know, or they're saying they're biting. Sometimes we bite. But what you and I know too is that behind the block is good intention. Almost everybody we meet, and this is the other big painful thing when it is religious affiliated, is we know that leaders have some good intention behind what they're doing. You know, there's a spiritual motive behind the harmful action, and that's really confusing sometimes with a family when a parent has really blown it up and done some terrible things. Their behavior, their block, so the block can be an aggressive thing. The block to the relationship can be a placating thing, or like a mother who enables the abusive father, or a father who enables the alcoholic mother. You know, those things that tear at this child. And in religious settings, that's part of it as well. You know, when we look at a family, it's easier to see. But behind those misdemeanors, there is good intention. And that's really confusing.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. I got to think about that one for a minute. I would definitely say there's, or at a minimum, there's disorientation.
Disorientation. You're the trainer, Ryan. Come on, EFFT
And
it.
I get accused sometimes of being a semantics Nazi. I like overthink about the word because sometimes it doesn't
Good.
matter what words you use, but sometimes it really does. You know, so I don't know. I would have to think through whether I would
Yeah.
always agree the intentions were good, but I would definitely agree with you that most people are not intending to harm.
Most people are not intending. And I hope you will. And then you can correct me and tell me if you think of it better, because you know, with attachment theory, I mean, I trust more for the innate goodness, the pure of heartness.
Yeah.
There's some really bad people in authority out there. Um, and then when you're saying maybe you're overthinking the words, and I'm thinking so much of Sue this month because you know it's the month we lost her last year, and I think if Sue is here, she'd be like, Ryan, words matter. She's like, you're not wrong, Ryan. Be explicit.
It sounds like it. That was well done right there. That's impressive.
Only with an English accent.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think your point is well taken. I do think that most leaders don't wake up in the morning thinking, I hope I can traumatize Tara this week. Like
No.
that's so far from their reality. And I love what you were saying before with the Kool-Aid. Like somebody hands me the Kool-Aid, I drink it. But not only that, I'm serving them. And now you're the villain in their story. So don't forget
Yes.
that every abused, traumatized person is also someone else's abuser. That's an uncomfortable reality that we face. And we're all in this
Yep.
cycle together. And that's a much more useful frame to heal because this whole us versus them, you know, the powerful bad pathological narcissist, and then like that doesn't work very well. That tends to create projections everywhere. And I'm not trying to say that you need to have tons of empathy for your abuser, but I do think there's a little bit of space to say, you know what, they're probably caught up in exactly what I'm trying to not get caught up in. Because
Yeah.
people that get hurt, which is everybody, and don't necessarily do their work, and then wake up just trying to do the best they can. They hurt people. And
Yeah.
but all of us hurt people at times. And so I do think that sets people up to have a pathway through this. In particular, if I can start to say, hey, Ryan, you were hurt by Mark and Jim or whatever it is. And it's like, all right, I got some work here to do with Mark and Jim or whomever that may be. It's a very different thing than starting off with, I'm hurt by the church,
Yes.
which is, I don't see people ever recover from that, ever.
It's too vague. And I appreciate it, Ryan. I think this is such an important moment. And I remember, and I because Jim Furrow is a lovely person in our lives, and I've done a lot of supervision and kind of borrowed therapy from Jim because he's my supervisor for so long. I
Great,
remember
lots of wisdom for sure.
he's so wise. And so I remember when I was working through some of my own trauma of like when I believed in a violent God, it impacted my leadership. That's the other thing. That was part of my block is like if there's a God who killed his kid and that's part of love, then there's a place for violence in love, which is ludicrous from an attachment perspective. And that has changed my view of supernatural love, knowing that we can do correction within love. There's no need for violence. But I when I would oops it up and I would enter into conflict with others, I believe there was an I Hate Terror club. So I don't know how Jim inspired me to do this, but one day I audited the people that I had served violent Kool-Aid to. And when I thought of it as the I Hate Terror Club, it seemed like this huge entity of all the people that I had injured, that I was the antagonist in their story. But when I actually like wrote out the list, I'm like, oh, all of those people that I have hurt make sense. Number one. Number two, it's not a club. And so I guess it's like depathologizing. That's not really a word, but it's like taking the blanket off and looking underneath the explicitness, like you're talking about. Get clear. Is it person A, B, C?
Yes.
The grand sweep and the pain of holding space that we are antagonists in some people's stories. And we can do healing within, but amends is not always possible or healthy.
Yes, that's correct. Well
Yeah.
said. Love that. And if we go from institutional trauma, religious trauma to, you know, a specific congregation, but even then it's too wide, down to like Mark and Joe. And then even with Mark and Joe, it's important not to defend them. I'm not saying that. And you're right. The goal isn't all reconciliation is not always the goal. That's not if you're a Bible kind of person that we're never commanded that. Forgiveness is this golden place that I think is healing of us. But reconciliation is conditional. It depends. But even with Mark and Joe, who wronged me, it's important to take an account specifically of what happened. Because oftentimes
Yeah.
what you find is Mark, who's a made-up figure for this discussion, like 80% of my interactions with him were actually really great. And he taught me
Yeah.
this, and he taught me that. And then something happened with Mark, and who knows what that is, but you could guess. And now I had this 20% of the things that happened with Mark that I'm now writing out very specifically. And I'm moving towards every day or two. Then I get away from it and I move back towards it with someone else or someone's else. And I'm doing this specifically. Now my brain starts to have an adaptive response.
Yes.
And the more general I leave it, I become less and less adaptive, more and more projective. As
Yeah.
I'm able to cut through these generalities and get specific, what are the 17% of my interactions with Mark that were abusive?
Yeah.
Not about defending him, it's about getting it clear. Now the brain, which is a pretty cool thing, I believe it's how God made the brain. From my worldview, I appreciate other people that have different perspectives on that, but in my opinion, that's how God made us. The brain naturally starts to become adaptive. It naturally starts to see a pathway
Mm.
painful forest. And so that's the piece that I like to kind of leave with people. And you mentioned a term before we came on here. So hope I can just talk through that
Yeah, sure.
semicolon there. Deconstruction. And I've had some, I think, good conversations and talking about in the context of Christianity, deconstruction versus deconversion. and how those two things are really wildly different, and
Oh, that's beautiful.
yeah, and I personally, and this is I appreciate the work of Tim Keller, who's I'm quoting him here, that we should all be deconstructing everything we believe all the time. I mean, I think that's
Yes.
part of growing in wisdom to go out, hold on, exactly what am I doing? What do I believe? And why do I believe that exactly? Is this just like a tradition passed down? Am I just like
Yeah.
going through the motions? And this is kind of fat I can cut off, right? And that's a good thing to continue to refine. I do that with EFT. Every time I do core skills, I stop and like, all right, hold on. What of this is not necessary? What do I need to emphasize even more? To me, that's a healing journey of deconstructing. Deconverting, on the other hand, isolates you. So,
Yes.
so moving out, that's moving out of the herd, which
That's the
again,
wasteland. That's the wasteland.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah,
That's like that. And it is, like William Paul Young and his book Lies We Believe About God, which I just think is one of the best theology texts because you can read it. And he's like, he says, hell is being included in love and fighting against it. There's this
oh,
place we always belong and we fight against it. So when I honor that and I grieve that wasteland experience, because it was hellish to be, and my experience was lying to myself, being like, well, this is wilderness. And when I peeled back the layer one day and I was like, holy shit, that that was singed earth. And how long was I there? You know, um, that's painful. And then that's what my heart breaks for people who what did you say? Not deconstruct, but
or
pardon? Deconvert.
deconvert. Yeah,
Like this, like moving out into nothing is a broken place to be. And it's maybe not as detrimental. We can still live and function and do good work in a spiritual wasteland. Um, People, when we see somebody who has entered the wasteland of like sexual trauma, physical trauma, addiction, their life becomes debilitated. So that's the risk here as well with some of these more psychological experiences, is we can still participate in the world. And so it's the rock bottom isn't as easy to see sometimes. It's my experience.
yeah. And again, going back to how the body responds to trauma, if we don't work with what the body's trying to do, then it's really, really easy to get in that projective categorizing, or I would just say therapeutic disorientation.
Mm.
I talked to someone maybe a couple of years ago. It was a very difficult time societally, right? We had the pandemic, we had societal uproar, especially in the US. Very, very difficult things happening. And this is someone I respect greatly. And we're just having a side, this isn't a client or anything, just someone who's really brilliant follower, Christ follower, and she said, I have some real problems with Jesus lately.
Mm.
I was taken off guard by that comment. I didn't say anything, but I just kind of listened, and for a couple of years, I'm like, wait, did Jesus do something different in the last 2 years? Or is there lots of hurt going on and this becomes all confused together? Right.
Yeah.
But far be it for me to tell someone what they should believe, but if they do if they are a follower of Christ, but then I have all these painful things happening, then a major part of the work is to get things in their place and not
Yeah.
have them wires crossed everywhere where the painful things that are going unaddressed in our society or in our life have us deconverting away from the herd, which is how mammals live well.
Yeah. And that too is like, and deconverting, like even when we parallel it to like family work, is a trauma response can deconvert us from the belief that family is valuable, or that, like I'll never have children because of what I endured. That's a deconversion statement because of family trauma. I will never trust a man to share my bed. That is a deconversion statement about family. Or there's so many ways. I'll never get married. I might date somebody, I might even be common law because I don't believe in marriage. Those are deconversions of family. And it softens it a bit to parallel it, because we can get a little anxious when we notice it with God, Jesus, God, Allah, like the language that we use for the supernatural higher power that is the same God that we all believe in.
I like that, and you're going back to that emotional cutoff piece, right? With those
Yeah,
comments. And I do want to be clear. I think I can speak for you. I know I can speak for me.
you go ahead.
I'm not at all suggesting that someone has to stay in some kind of toxic
No,
relation. That's not what
no.
we're saying at all. In fact, you could do a whole 10 episodes on this. I did a deep dive a long time ago now on why someone should not stay in a toxic relationship from a very, very uh gosh, I'm sorry, I've lost the word now. Anyway, if you're trying to go very, very literal
Yeah.
to Christ's teachings, which are a call to suffer, by the way, and you can spin that however you want to, but sacrificial love, it does involve some suffering. But if I continue to stay with someone who's abusing me, I've actually even failed to love them.
Mm,
I have now enabled them to continue to be off the pathway with their own faith. So at a
yeah.
minimum, there's lots of rationale to go, hey, this is not okay. I've got to take a left step. But then what do I do with my heart? And what do I do with taking care of this trauma? And what do I do with, does this mean I'm going to project this everywhere? Or does this have me moving into the wasteland of isolation or what? Right. And so
Yeah.
thoughts that come to mind for me that I would, back to semantics here. Sorry. I know there's lots of talk about a safe person. I think life has taught me, it's just one person's opinion. I no longer use that phrase because I think it actually sets us up for more of this. I like to say, instead of find a safe person, I like to say continue to pursue safe relationships. Because if you want to get technical, there's no such thing as a safe person, meaning someone who's so safe that they're not going to hurt me. They're never going to disappoint me. They're always
Hmm.
going to be this attuned person. And if I set out looking for that, I'm always going to be disappointed. But there are safe relationships, meaning someone really will center on my voice. Someone is willing to do the work to repair with me.
Mm,
Someone is willing to honor, excuse me, my journey, that cares about my pain, at a minimum is willing to sit with
yeah.
me, hear me, even agree to disagree, but care for me. Like that's that safe relationship that we desperately need. But it's a little different than going, it's going to be this safe person. Because then now we've divided like the bad people from the good people. And it's just not that simple. The bad people are also products of their own woundedness. The good people are not perfect.
Yeah. They're products of their own woundedness as well. And there's no them, just us.
Thank you.
And that, like we'll say, I can't remember if it's EFT or circle of security, is like we get into young adult life and we're looking for that person who will meet all of our unmet needs and wants. And so we romanticize, and there's this lust and this idealizing, and you're the one. And then we get married, and then all of a sudden it's like, holy shit, you're just a person, you know, who squeezes the toothpaste wrong and yells at me sometimes and chews loudly, whatever the things are that are imperfect. But and then when what I'll say to couples is they come in and people, it's funny, there's a subconscious, like, I'm going to go to therapy, couples therapy, to learn how to not fight. And I'm like, well, the good news is that we're going to work so that you guys are together into old age. And that's the real goal. The bad news is you're going to fight for the rest of your lives with each other. So we want to figure out how it's working and how to do it fair and how to repair when it flares up.
Perfect segue to what I want to say. Because how we set this up goes a long way. And that's my number one lesson I've taken. And it's obscure a bit from this, years and years of going on right now of the deconstruction movement, which I think is a lot of good of that.
Me too.
Deconversion is a different discussion some, but I think there's a lot of space to use this because what I realized, having been someone who's been involved in lots of church over my life, is that I just didn't know this, that people walk in a church building with extremely wildly different expectations than I had.
Mm,
And this is one of the ways I'm really, really thankful for my heritage that I honestly, I'm not a part of anymore. You know, I'm kind of unaffiliated. I attend a congregation, but in terms of like big picture denominations, I'm not a part of one of those anyway. Um, what were you expecting from your church leaders?
mm,
What are you looking for when you come in? How good does it have to be for you to be okay?
mm.
If I find out that the leader of my church was out all weekend doing horrible things, can I hear that and not be shaken in what I believe?
Yeah.
And for me, I'm like, duh. That was the part of my heritage I am proud of. I was trained really, really hard. You do not follow a person.
Yeah.
You develop your own faith. You read scripture so that you know what you believe. You write that on your heart. And what humans are going to do is going to vary. And I'm so thankful for that now because I'm finding out after the fact that a lot of people develop extreme loyalties to a person or to a group. And then when something goes wrong, it rocks their world all the way to a deconversion. And then so in retrospect, I look back and go, oh, so you were expecting this. You had this sense that your leaders were going to be, and now it's shaken, really even divided yourself.
Mm,
This is an opportunity to deconstruct. Hey, what is it when I walk in some church building or whatever I do religiously? What do I need exactly? What am I expecting? You know, what can I see that person as just another person? Is
yeah.
it okay if my preacher says four things next service that I completely disagree with? And can I be fine with that?
Yes. Yeah. And I love this, Ryan, because it's sort of like that being a good steward of what we've been given, which is this thing, this entity. And like one of the things I'm really passionate about is churches that follow the Christian calendar. So I know I'm like, if I go in and they're following the Christian calendar, that means something to me. I want to enter into the liturgy that the cloud of witnesses has been entering in for a long time. That's important to me.
Yeah.
And maybe I don't love what the pastor said that day,
Yeah.
but we're on this piece where I am my soul food. My heart is getting some of this healing. That's where my heart is at right now. It's following this calendar, the Christian calendar. And so, knowing ourselves, this is also a piece, maybe a spiritual piece that we've learned is to deny ourselves, but ourselves and like entering into our being, to know who we are so that we can move into relationships,
Yes.
moving into relationship with our people, our partners, our children, our colleagues, but also into the relationship with the church
Yeah.
or whatever institution.
Yeah,
Um,
and I have such high respect for people of faith. I mean, I got a text this morning from a lady who's upset with me. I had no idea, and she sent me such a beautiful text. I mean, it really was touching because she's saying, "Hey, something landed funny, but I've been prayerful," and I'm like, it's such an honor to be with people who are co-regulating with their faith. When that's done well, they can rebound, they can become a safe relationship. Not a safe person, they can become a safe, because I'm like, hey, let's talk. I don't know what you're talking about. And I will tell you, being someone who had some hard experiences with authority, and then I was in middle authority for years and years and years, and then only in the last 3 or 4 years have I been top authority. And I will tell you, it's a lot harder than it looks. Because when you're at the top, you look back, I don't want to say down, like it's super hierarchical, but when you look back, you realize, oh, there's 9,000 people out there, and every one of them expects me to make them happy.
yeah.
I'll please 62%, and then 24% are upset, and 10% feel abused by the very thing that 62% feel happy with. So it is harder than it looks. But
For sure. And you do, I mean, like you do, you're a trainer, so you will sit with large groups, hundreds of people. And you're not pizza, Ryan. You know, you can't make everybody happy, but
no,
it's still this, the pain of leadership is we wound people. Sometimes we just say a thing, we make a joke. We are dysregulated in ourselves
yeah,
and we hurt people.
right.
Okay, so we're gonna wind things down because
Can I just say one more thing?
you go right ahead. I'll talk to you for
Last,
7 hours. I think you're busy today.
no, last thing for me, because this makes me really sad because I have high respect for people like this person who sent me that text message, and it was the nicest confrontation ever, and I'm like, wow, she really worked hard to get that. And so that is such a beautiful thing. I've been seeing clients for 26 years and almost 41,000 clinical hours. And a lot of it's been in the southern US, which is very high religiosity, or whatever you want to call that. And I also work with lots of people from other worldviews too, which is awesome. But anyway, the unhappiest people I've ever seen are church critics.
Mm.
So they are people who have their faith is very important to them, but they get stuck. They come into church with certain expectations that are set, and they leave church sort of criticizing what happened there. And my intention in saying that is not at all to silence them, because there's a place for critical feedback. In fact, you can't lead without it. And at the same time, it does something to your body to get stuck in that role where I'm constantly evaluating. It's really a trauma response in ways.
It totally is. It
And
is.
the more I get critical, and so then they'll say, what's your approach? And I'd say, well, first of all, don't model after me. I'm just another person, and I'm 48 right now. And when I'm 58, I may have a different view. But I get up and go to a congregation primarily motivated to check on other people. That's my primary motivation, and to remind myself that I'm a part of
Yes.
something greater than myself, and it's a reset for me. It's a good routine for my family. And what the preacher says is like 14th. And if they
Yeah.
say something that, then great, I'll learn. If they say stuff that I'm like, yeah, I don't know, I said that a little strong, fine. Right. And so that helps me find some resiliency, because that preacher is just where they are right now. And
Yeah.
10 years from now, they may be like, oh, never mind, I messed that up. I know I do that. The things that I emphasized when I was 38, I feel differently now. So it is important
Yeah.
that I can offer that grace to other people.
Yeah. And and we're going to wind things down. I want to scoop this up because this is so important. And I want to do one more pass at it as somebody with a busy brain and anxiety. So like overthinking, over dissecting can cause me harm. So if I go into a situation and I'm overthinking, I'm popping out, I'm exiting, which is different than auditing. So if you're good at thinking and that's something that's helpful, it's like, how do I shift my overanalyzing? Because other people don't think that much. And what Ryan is talking about is entering into these experiences where we're just participating. Like we're participating. Ryan and I are participating. We're deconstructing in this conversation. This is deconstruction. Yeah. So beautiful. Thank you. Ryan Rana is a marriage and family therapist, Joshua Tree Center, Arkansas, Kansas. And EFT trainer, supervisor, success and vulnerability. I'm going to put all this stuff down below. Thank you, Ryan. And I always adore what you do, how you do it, and anytime I get to talk to you.
Well, thank you, Tara. It's been an honor to be with you. And I don't know who I'm speaking to, but if you've been hurt by authority, I want to say I'm so sorry this has happened to you. Maybe no other authority says that, but there is hope. And you don't have to leave the herd because you're hurt. In fact, the herd is where hurt heals. And so I'll leave it with that. So thanks for having me on, Tara. It's my honor to be with you.
Yeah. Thank you, Ryan.